Accessing agent files. Brian Sovryn. Early 21st century anarchist. Creator and host of the podcast Sovereign Tech. By the year 2021, the show would be instrumental in the downfall of various conservative ideologies in the government, helping usher in an incredible time.
Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild ride. You're listening to Sovereign Tech with your host, the man in triple black, the Golden Stallion of the tech world, Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now, here's Brian.
That's right, the Libertine-in-Chief, the man of tomorrow, the Golden Stallion. Here for another little extra episode of Sovereign Tech. And what I actually have here is I was graciously asked by Chris Ellis to be a Mr. Chris Ellis, who is very well known in the Bitcoin space and the blockchain space, to be on a little special with him on the World Crypto Network, of course, run by the inimitable Thomas Hunt. And we were also joined by, of course, the lovely Paige Peterson, and actually by Paul Snow of Factom. And that's what this was all about, was discussing this issue of Factom is this meta layer for Bitcoin that pretty much is designed to be used for titles, registry, all of that kind of stuff. So there was a discussion about this, because obviously I don't believe in, or I don't care for contracts, ID systems, registries, titles, all this stuff, all of which you'll hear us talk about. And of course, Paige Peterson, it would appear she does not either. In fact, she's pretty eloquent in this with her points on it. In fact, bringing up some great analogies, including ones I think perhaps having to do with the Native Americans. But I'll leave that to you to hear about. And so it was an interesting discussion. Some of the things, like my concern with pruning, that, Chris Ellis kind of, he did a pretty good job of addressing some of that. Didn't really address the idea of rollbacks, though. Like, what if, everything that you own, if it's all, registered on Factom, what happens if Factom, if the dev team decides to do a rollback? That didn't come up in this, but this is certainly, a debate that is largely just beginning. But in the end, I mean, maybe the most unfortunate thing of a lot of this technology is that it's really just making government more efficient, if that's who's going to use it. And government being efficient is not a good thing. Some would say that it is. I would completely disagree. You want government to be as dumb and slow and bumbling as it could possibly be until the day that it no longer exists, or at least until the day that it no longer affects your life. One may argue that governments will always exist. Maybe. But certainly, people can go out and get their freedom. So, this was fun. It got a lot of attention, it would seem, in the crypto space, and I'm glad that it did, and I was glad to be a part of it. I will not come back after this, but, think for yourself on this. What do you think? Of course, if you have thoughts on it, you can email me, brian@zomiaofflinegames.com. Or if you want to, help out Chris Ellis with the work that he's doing, because he did bring this, great conversation together. There's a link in the show notes to the video version of this. And from that link, you can find ways perhaps to donate to Chris Ellis if you'd like to do that. Credit to everybody. I mean, there were some tough questions here, and everybody handled it all with, relative aplomb and peacefulness, quite frankly. So I enjoyed it. I would look forward to doing further such conversations in the future, perhaps. So I had the pleasure of actually, being on a talk with Chris Ellis, at PorcFest this past year. And I don't think that talk ever got released, unfortunately, but that was really, really good too. Interesting stuff, talking about Bitcoin and whatever else. So anyway, enjoy this. This is, Chris Ellis's little, Honesty is Subversive, I believe was the name of it. And do check it out. Listen, Paige makes some great points. Everybody has interesting things to say. So, I'll let this ride out right into the music. Regular episode coming out this week, of course, as always. Carpe Lucem, everybody. I'll see you on the other side.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Not My Natural Habitat. This is an office space. What the hell am I doing in here? I am live from Canary Wharf in London, the fraud capital of the world. And this is my best friend, a photocopier. And if you don't mind, before we get started on today's show, I was just going to pay homage to The West Wing, one of my favorite TV shows of all time. Do you remember when they used to do these really long tracking shots down corridors? It's like cinematic. So I'm actually at level 39, which is an incubator, accelerator kind of collaboration workspace for startups. I think the banking industry has finally realized that their time is up and they need to get on the next hype cycle. So they're actually giving away a lot of this. Look at this. Look at how big this office is, right? This is actually level 24, even though they're called level 39. This is actually level 24. A lot of empty space. I looked at the company that used to own this place, and they were just like a business consultancy that went out of business back in 2007, so I don't know if it's been empty. Also, one of my favorite features of any office, the office plant. Just in case you wanted reminding of the biophilia that nature actually exists out there. So there's one other thing I really want to show you before we get involved and stuck into our conversation today, and that is the tremendous views from this building. It's 60 stories high. It's the actual address is 1 Canada Square, and you'll probably know it. You can just look it up on the internet. And look at that. Most of the people, most of the time, don't do any work. All they do is look out windows. That's all they do when they're in their office. It's a spectacular view you can see all across London. It's kind of like the UK equivalent of the World Trade Center, I guess. So, yeah, the title of today's show is Honesty is Subversive, which is actually a quote from today's guest, Paul Snow, of the Factom project. Say hi, Paul.
Howdy. How's it going?
Yeah, very well, thanks. It's like, this reminds me of The Matrix. Do you remember that scene in The Matrix? Just like infinity. Yeah, so it's great to have you on because we're going to talk about the immutability of the blockchain and your latest project that you're working on called Factom, because of course we're coming right from the financial capital of the world, some would say, where they like their databases nice and mutable. They like to be able to go back and correct entries later. And also joining me is Theo Goodman.
Hello, everybody.
From Sound Wallet. How are you doing?
Great, thanks.
And we also have Paige Peterson from MadeSafe.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. And Brian Sovryn from, where are you from, Brian?
New Hampshire, where it's nice and cold.
It's actually been snowing here in London today as well. It's been pretty hairy. The big news in London here, of course, today is that the actual transport network is working. Usually when it snows, they just say, no, sorry, can't do it. We'll do what we can. We'll try and get you somewhere.
So hell has frozen over then?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I just think they used it as an excuse to get the day off. So I want to start by framing this discussion in terms of one of my favorite commentators in this space, Taylor Swift, who, as well as being an international pop star, is also an expert in security and InfoSec. And she actually quoted this from a Google Chrome security team, where they were quoted as saying, users are neither stupid nor lazy. They are musicians, parents, journalists, firefighters. It isn't fair to also expect them to become security experts too. And they have other important things to do beside reading your lovingly crafted explanations of SSL. But there is a little bit of context here, and one of them is a question that Paige brought up last week, asking if a criminal organization like the US government starts using Bitcoin blockchain to track ownership of private land and property, would you still use it? And of course, hilarity then ensued as lots of people kind of wade into the debate. And I have to admit, I'm really conflicted on this issue. If you've been following my show for the last year or two, you'll know that I'm actually kind of beset and obsessed with this notion of timestamping, mainly because as a philosopher, I'm actually obsessed with time itself as a concept. And also when I was a kid, I was a coder and I studied cryptography. And so when Bitcoin came back into my life, I was like, oh, wow, this kind of has been finally solved. Now, recently it came to my attention there was a project called Factom, and so I went off and I read the white paper and I read through it, and I'm also familiar, I've been attending the Eris meetups and also the Ethereum meetups, and so I really wanted to hear from our guest today, Paul Snow. Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and maybe you could give us an introduction to the Factom project.
Okay, well, my name is Paul Snow. I am a programmer from the dawn of time. I went to school in the late 70s, and so I'm a little old for this space in some ways. I have been involved in building compilers and interpreters for a long time, and I built rules engines starting in the 2000s that were used for doing eligibility determination and running commercial retail sites and a bunch of other applications. Basically, defining rules in some sort of deterministic way and applying them in situations it has a lot of applications. When I discovered Bitcoin in 2011, I unfortunately did not take the full dive. I trusted journalistic descriptions of the algorithms, and thus I dismissed it as a technology. I did have some PayPal money that I could transfer to some little organization called Mt. Gox in Japan, and bought a bunch of Bitcoin just to flush money out of my PayPal account because I no longer wanted my money in PayPal. Like 2 weeks later, PayPal cut off Mt. Gox. There was like a window of maybe a month or two you could do this, and that was the majority of Bitcoin I've ever owned. And then I became very intrigued with Bitcoin over 2013. I actually did read the technical papers, and I got involved in a Bitcoin meetup group in Austin, Texas, and through 2013. We eventually put on several little mini conferences that led to the Texas Bitcoin Conference in March, and we'll be doing the Texas Bitcoin Conference as a little icon up there again in March of this year, and hope for everybody comes. It's going to be quite fun in downtown Austin. But after that conference in 2014, I decided to start this Factom project. I was encouraged quite a bit by David Johnston, who wants to decentralize everything, and the goal was much more ambitious, but we slowly reduced it down to its core and most foundational parts, and that's Factom, and that's where...
So you're the founder of the project, are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the architect and founder of the project, yes.
I wanted to pick up on one thing you said in your introduction. You said that you are quite relatively older in the demographics for this group, and I actually think that's probably just the right age to be in, because I was a child of the 80s, and I got into technology, I think, just the right time when you were actually pulling things apart and getting into the hardware. So I learned, my dad taught me basic and machine code, and then I later did a little bit of assembly language, right, when that became fashionable. But I then got out of it, went into the arts industry before everything went into the high-level languages like Python. So now when I've been learning the coding again, I just feel like it's like import hashlib, and it's like, what do you mean import hashlib? You know, what did I just do? I just loaded up this library, and then I go into the library, and that loads up a library, and everything seems to me nowadays that most programmers are essentially, and if I'm not being derogatory to anyone watching, I think they're mostly IT technicians, no, and they're just basically there to maintain, and it's a janitorial kind of role. And the reason why I want to segue into the next thread of conversation is because I want to hear Paige and Brian, because there is this issue, okay, that at the moment you've probably got fewer than 1,000 people on the internet that really understand this technology root and branch, and then you've got everyone else, the sort of the pragmatist market, or the, you know, just everyday lay people who understand that there's something wrong with the existing banking system, and perhaps they also think there's something wrong with the governance structure too, but they don't think that Bitcoin is the solution because A, they don't understand it, and the people that do tend to be like Avon ladies. They tend to just kind of, you know, want to sort of persuade them of it, and there are some genuine moral hazards, like, for example, the absolute persistent tracking of people on the internet. So I wanted to know, like, let's start with you, Paige. Like, what are some of your concerns with tracking things on an immutable ledger? That means that once it's out there for good. You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Well, I guess first and foremost is and just, I guess, a basic concept with individuals and humans is that everyone makes mistakes, and everyone could potentially have something that they've done in the past, or, you know, they've been a part of an organization and they realize that was wrong, and therefore they, want to go and change their ways, change their personality, make up for whatever they've done. But in the case that it's in a permanent state, in a permanent ledger, there's no way of actually reversing that, regardless if they've, 10 years later down the line, they've completely changed as a person. And then secondly, I think I hear Brian talk a lot about this, and this is kind of, one of the bigger things is being able to exit the system, being able to leave, have the option of not only opting in, but also opting out. That's pretty key for me.
So this is the point, I think, that came up for me, which I felt really reserved about, was how do you get people to respect the blockchain? Because part of the white paper, let me just show the Factom white paper, the part that actually impressed me the most and where I spent a lot of my time kind of mulling over was this notion of proving the negative, is that perhaps for the first time with a cryptocurrency, we have the ability to prove that some transaction in our database hasn't been changed or that it hasn't been spent. And as a result, this could be used for land deeding. And indeed, I coined this concept of the blockchain ID, and that people could, put their public-private key, their PGP keys in the blockchain, and then, BitNation kind of went off to Ghana and tried to do some land deeding. But it's fraught with moral hazard, and the reason is that if one person doesn't respect your blockchain and decides to have their own, then it then ultimately comes down to the threat of violence, one would assume. Now, is that a naive assumption, do you think, Paul? I mean, are we going to have to engage in this sort of political act of persuading people to respect our blockchain as opposed to anyone else's?
Well, I think that I'm not entirely sure. Let me place that out there, and I also want to address the idea of change and mistakes and errors. I do think that Factom provides for a record every mitigation technique possible, with the exception of denial, and I can see certainly how that could be very, very damaging to an individual who, in their 20s, decided that they were absolutely this sort of person, and put on record that I will be this sort of person forever, and then in their 30s, they realize, oh, I want to be a different sort of person, and now with immutable ledgers, you have the possibility that you can never deny the past. But I would propose that, in fact, Facebook and Twitter and all the logging services that we have for these technologies are already placing us into that position. There's so many stories of people who can't get a job because of something they put on Facebook or something they put on Twitter. Now, your question was more specific, and now I've gone off and forgotten your question. So what was your question exactly?
So you've addressed a really good point, that this could be a fait accompli. This could be something that we were always going into, and then you run into this notion that Cody Wilson brought up with the 3D printed gun. When he did it, he said, this has already happened. You think no one else is going to do this? If they hadn't already, he just wanted to give everyone the source code so that everyone had the guns at the same time, rather than making it privileged for one group of people. Now, we already know that the NSA is doing this because the Snowden leaks, we know that they're persisting. That means they're storing all of your information on a permanent record, and they're basically using it if they have to. Now, my question was more about how do we get everyone to agree on the state transition? Right. Does it involve the tacit threat of violence? Because this is one of the things that comes up a lot is, well, if you don't want to pay taxes, you can always leave, right? You can always leave and go somewhere else. But if I understand projects like Bitcoin 2.0, projects like Ethereum and so on, well, I think what I understand is this is a totalizing view, that if you don't respect at least a finite number of an oligarchical system of blockchains, then where do you go? Where do you leave to?
Exactly, and one of the design features of Factom, the goal is to create a system that tracks information that you place in your lists and you can attest to them. And the very fact that you've attested to the validity of the chain is part of the immutable record. So the argument becomes, do I believe me in this blockchain versus me in this other blockchain? If you've really established in some way, and this is always external to the blockchain, but established in some way that a particular blockchain is your record, then I think you pretty much have to stick with that. And I do think that I do think that the blockchain could potentially lead to arguments, but that is ignoring the fact that we already spend the time in a legal case arguing about the order of events, what the chain of events were, what the order of actions were, what people actually did, and talking to people who contest wills. 60 to 70% of the arguments are whether particular documents are legitimate or not, and whether they were filed at the time dated or not. And so arguing the timeline has always been fundamental to those arguments. At least Factom can provide a mechanism to avoid that kind of argument and reduce the doubt of what the timeline is. So I'm not sure if that really answers the question of which blockchain.
I don't think we're going to get a final answer on this show, because I think it's a lot deeper than most people think it is. I think we're sort of sleepwalking into this world that we're not really prepared for, and I agree with you that this was happening anyway, that the dialogue now, where I am at the moment in this debate, is that dialogue now should be how we enter into this. And actually, instead of forgetting, I think that it should be about forgiving, given that we are entering a world where you can't control what someone else does with what they just witness, given that the independence of that witness, I mean, anyone could be taking a recording, right, when you're in a meeting, when you're at home. I think the important thing is to get the right balance between the formal and the informal. Like when I'm with my friends, I don't expect them to be recording me secretly. I also would appreciate it if all the CCTV cameras in London got taken down and they weren't used to do face matching with my passport. So given that we are entering into that world, if the discourse changed more from this notion of forgetting to forgiving, then we might live in a world where we actually come to terms with the fact that we all make mistakes, for example, the fact that identity is prismatic, that we can become lots of different people and be lots of different people. I spend more time with myself than anyone else. Only I know the full history of me, or has the capacity to know the full history of me. No one else does, and that puts me in a unique position. But if you don't have that strong sense of the ability to forgive, which means to give way for another, then I think you do definitely run into trouble, whether or not you're storing things indefinitely or not. Now, Brian, I wanted to get your take on this, because you did come in on this debate on Twitter and you said something quite funny about the registration of your car. What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. Well, first off, I want to say that now I know Paul to some degree, and he's a good guy, and I actually really appreciate the answer of "I don't know" or "I'm not sure." That's huge to hear out of any company on the planet, for that matter, let alone in the blockchain space. Okay, and I really do appreciate that. But at the same time, this is, I think, a project like Factom and even like Ethereum and some of these others, what they're trying to do with title structures and all of that. I don't think people have a very good sense, and I notice this in Silicon Valley in general. Being very broad in my application here, they don't have a good sense of history. And because where does the title system in and of itself come from? And it really comes from a money-making racket by the title distribution system, or by the title distribution center, or whoever that happens to be. Okay, and so because otherwise, before the title system, usually some form of bill of sale was good enough. And we know that that's still good enough, because an example I gave on Twitter was that I used to collect older cars from like the early 70s or before, and any car before 1972 does not require a title, for you to own it and for you to legally drive it on the road. And so the question becomes, one of the beauties of Bitcoin for me was that it eliminated the need for banks. It eliminated 99% of the financial system that we accept, not that it's good, but that we accept. And so I think putting, this is because, like, one of the things Factom's trying to do is eliminate the bloat of putting these systems onto Bitcoin in the first place. But what if you're not just putting bloat onto a blockchain, but you're actually putting a ton of bloat onto life? That's not necessary at all. like a lot of these title systems, a lot of these identity systems, etc. So I have a real issue with that, because we have clear-cut cases where these things are not needed at all. Yet it's like I can't help but feel that it's coming up with something, just ways to I don't know, a system of control, or to make people feel better about accepting these things when it's a much larger issue, and it's not just as simple as when we get rid of some power structures like governments or whatever else, if that's a goal for some people, which a lot of people in the Bitcoin space it is. If you put, you don't have to go A to A, B to B, C to C. Why don't we just eliminate half of the alphabet? That's not necessary, and just concentrate on that.
We should probably just take a quick look at something that I pulled up in the consensus paper, which is in the description below. You'll find the links to both the white paper and the consensus ledger. And one of the interesting things that you brought up in the design pool, and please tell me if I'm understanding this correctly, is that you have to understand the hashes backwards, which means that you have what some people call front-side anonymity. So I can have something called a chain ID, which can just be like a PGP public key. It's just a random string of numbers and letters. But you're not insisting, are you, within the protocol that that's tied to my legal identity, unlike companies like Facebook and Google, which are now mandating that you put your legal identity along with all of your actions on the internet. Am I understanding that right? You can just masquerade behind a key. Is that true?
Yes, and let me make something clear too. Factom doesn't actually implement title technology, title management technology. If Factom produces an immutable ledger, and on which you can write any data that you want. Now we are working with a company, with a country, to create something that can utilize Factom for their land title management system, right? But to address Brian's concern, the motivation for doing this is to stop theft, because in that particular country, what their problem is people keep coming up with fraudulent titles and seizing land that isn't theirs, and they have these titles that are in dusty books and that sort of stuff. And what they want to do now is to create a auditable process that has actual signatures of I viewed this document, I approve that this title is accurate as we've recorded it, and it goes through a review process with many people putting their responsibility essentially on those decisions, taking responsibility for those decisions, right. So that when you are documenting the ownership of this land, a corrupt official can't just simply assign that land to somebody that they want to, or extract an exorbitant fee from someone to get the right to a title that they already have. And so this was, so anyway, that's the motivation. That's why we're involved in that project, and yet this is different from Factom.
Well, can I just jump in? So basically what you're calling it, a lot of developers call this dumb technology. What they mean by that is the technology doesn't presume too much. It just does what it does really, really well, and it's up to the humans to decide how they appropriate that tool. And I just want to draw on a quote by Julian Assange, who says that the privacy should be for the weak and accountability should be for the strong. And there has been this hope for some time now, particularly in the GitHub repos, where people have been talking about this, where they've been talking about self-stabilization mechanisms, which can make it costly to scale the anonymity structure, so that if you are very weak and you only have limited resources, it's easy to be anonymous. But the bigger you want to be, the harder that gets, just because of the traceability. In order to have got what Bitcoin fundamentally presents, remember, is digital scarcity. It allowed for things online to be scarce for the first time. And the only way that we know of doing that is by making it infinitely traceable. So Brian, are you sort of satisfied at all by anything that Paul has said, or have you got anything that's still bugging you about this?
Well, am I to understand that you're saying, Paul, that Factom is more of a redundancy to the system that already exists, and it's not a replacement?
I think what I'm trying to say is that Factom is providing a pure blockchain technology distillation, and you then apply that however you wish. But one of the things about immutable ledgers is they tend to they tend to be honest, because it's very, very hard to know today what lie I want to tell tomorrow. And if the lie has to be in the ledger, and I don't know what the lie is going to be until tomorrow, then basically my ability to lie is dramatically reduced. And to take the discussion about the NSA and the government, they are creating records of our past, but today there's nothing stopping them from creating whatever past for us to produce, because they can go and change records, and suddenly I no longer have a credit score, suddenly I no longer have bank accounts, suddenly I no longer have balances, and it was because they can arbitrarily go into databases and make changes, and there isn't any way to hold them accountable for that. And so if we have... Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. I wanted to hear what Brian just wanted to address that one point you just made. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I guess what stops a dev team, kind of like how the Bitcoin dev team got rid of BitDust. What stops a dev team from erasing whatever points that they want? What stops them, or even like they talk about doing pruning and all that? What stops what stops any dev team from doing? Because this is still and this is a marketing issue I have with a lot of blockchain companies, is they're saying that they don't have a centralized database. Look, any blockchain is a centralized database. All right, it's just it's everybody's got a copy, but it's still a centralized database that
What do you mean, like socially speaking, it is because it's a bunch of geeks all storing it? You mean, or?
Well, no, I mean, like, there's one exact spot where this complete ledger exists. So it is a centralized database. I mean, by the dictionary definition. As to where people say we're getting away from that, but not really. I don't see us getting away from that. But I am curious what exactly stops, just the dev team itself from perhaps getting socially engineered or coerced into removing bits and pieces, not unlike the Bitcoin dev team has already done.
No, I can answer that. No, what happens when you download the Bitcoin QT client, for example, is it will run its own independent check of the blockchain itself. So it already has built into its software the Genesis block of the Bitcoin blockchain, and it will process it according to the same rules as everyone else. Now, the reason we can tell if Gavin Andreessen tries to play any kind of funny business with us, the lead developer of Bitcoin, is because he's signed the compilers. He's signed the code once it's been compiled, such that if he makes any modification, we will know about it. So it's distributed geospatially is what we usually mean by distributed. I still think it is semi-centralized just because you've got a very narrow band of people that really understand this and can do it, and it is true that on some of the weaker chains that didn't have the hash rates, because remember the fundamental difference between a blockchain and, let's say, an Oracle database is fundamentally it's the database management policies, right? It's who gets to change the data. Now in Bitcoin's blockchain, you have to have the key, the whole key, and nothing but the key. You can't change an entry unless you can prove that you own that private key. And that is a process that can actually take place independently of a network connection. You can just sign a transaction on a computer that's got no network capability, produce a public message signed with your private key, push that onto the network, and then a distributed miner will then pick it up, and you have no control over who picks that entry up. So I don't know that unless it's like a really weak blockchain, the pruning, even with pruning, the block headers still remain. And they do a checkpoint with what's called the Merkle root, which I often read out on this show if we're recording anything important. I want to timestamp it. So the Merkle root is the sum of all of the previous blocks going back all the way through time. It takes all of their hashes independently, and it forms something called a Merkle tree. And then in every block, it publishes something called the Merkle root. So even if you prune the actual transactions, the Merkle root will still prove if anything has changed. Sorry, that was a very verbose answer, but in summary, it's only really possible on weaker blockchain.
Yeah, and I would say that that the maybe in fewer words, any change to the history breaks the hashes.
Yeah.
So if they change something you know they did, and thus, while I guess even in our system there is a potential for someone to be able to erase data, but there wouldn't be a way to erase data in a way that cannot be detected. I would be able to see the missing data. And if they were to erase data somehow at the lower control structures, the block level, kind of like Chris was talking about with the blockchain, Factom has a very small control layer. If they erased one of those entries, then they would have to go to every system and somehow erase them across this distributed system. So I don't really see how anyone changes the past, and I think that it's very, very difficult to see how the past can be modified by even a large country, as long as the fundamental structure holding the anchors is solid and the majority of the people recording data in Factom are honest. At the point that they're not honest, they can censor, but they still can't modify and they can't talk for someone else. You know, go back to what Chris says. Unless you have the private key, nobody can sign the next entry chain. So
it's similar to the way Keybase operate at the moment, where when you sign up for Keybase.io and you can put your public key there, they actually put a hash of your public key into the blockchain so that they can be censored and someone can shut down the website and stuff like that. But you can't actually change any of the claims that were made on their website. So Theo, you've been standing very, very patiently. Hi. What do you think? What do you make of all of this?
Oh, I just wanted to ask a few questions.
Go ahead.
Hey, Paul, what's up? So you said that who is it that could delete things? I mean, would that be like kind of putting a black marker on the paper? You know how you see the documents. I mean, could they do something like that, or what would you would see that they changed it? You said, would it be essentially the same as blacking out something?
Oh, well, the way Factom is organized is you have at the root level, and you can see this in the white paper. At the root level, there's a directory block, and the directory block merely has links to entry blocks which hold all the entries that came in within that period for a particular chain, and then each entry in the entry block points to an entry, and what I'm going to hypothesize is that the weakest part of our system is the distribution of entries, because at that leaf level, those are the data structures that people most easily skip. If somehow the government managed to get rid of an entry so that nobody had a copy of that entry anymore, then in some sense that would be like deleting something out of Factom. I don't know how easily they could do that. Run some sort of NSA virus across the world or something.
Okay.
But if they managed to do that, you would know that there's a hash, but you would know that there isn't any data to match that hash, so you would know that the data is gone. So
okay.
That's what I'm saying.
And I just wanted to Chris, you had a picture of the structure of Factom just a second ago. I don't know if everybody saw that, but I was wondering, okay, you have the Bitcoin blockchain and then it goes off into Factom. Well, who secures that, the Factom database? I mean, is it like mined, or, how is that secure? Who has this here, the directory blocks and all of this? Where is that? Where is that located?
You're muted, Paul. You're muted.
Hello?
Oh, there I am. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so how is that going to work with all of these? Who secures all these, and what's their incentive to secure it in an honest way?
Well, the federated servers have every incentive to secure them in an honest way, because they're getting a reward paid out in the tokens from the factoid system, that a fixed reward every period, every day. Okay, for their work in securing the system. And then the people using the system are the ones that are voting these federated servers in, and so they have every incentive to make sure that they stay happy. And the federated servers manage, essentially, the more people use the protocol, the more valuable their incentive becomes. And so they have every incentive to make sure that everyone's data coming into the system is secured. And everyone that runs a Factom node has the ability to secure some part of the entire system, all or part of the entire system. So so basically, it's like its architecture looks very, very much like Bitcoin's architecture, and its distributed nature is very much like Bitcoin's distributed nature. But the proof of work that's securing Factom is inherited from Bitcoin by placing the anchors into Bitcoin on a periodic basis. So we're right at this point. We're kind of making a bet on Bitcoin. We can also put our anchors into other chains like Ripple or Next or Ethereum. But right now, the greatest store of proof of work that anybody has ever seen in the history of mankind is in the Bitcoin blockchain, and so that's the best place for us to put anchors.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to go to Paige. Paige, do you have any more questions? Are you satisfied yet about the ownership model?
So I'm particularly stuck on this concept of using a blockchain for I guess I'm mostly stuck on the blockchain for governance and you know, working with, you mentioned you're working with Nigeria on land titles or whatever, and I know that's not your main, like you're about the technology. It's not, this is just like one venture that is an application of Factom, but nonetheless, you made a video about it. It's, you know, front and center, and I'm mostly concerned about the concept of accountability being 100% transparent on a blockchain. However, the, you know, transfer of ownership could still, like, the theft can still happen. All you need is a gun, right? You just need a gun, and you need to say, sign this property over to me, and that's it. Right. So that's one issue that I'm still kind of stuck on. Secondly, I just want to kind of address the idea with Bitcoin as it is. I use it, you use it, we all use it because we agree on the initial distribution of the Bitcoins. This doesn't happen in property ownership. I don't agree with a lot of the distribution of property ownership, and if that were to be put on a blockchain, I would heavily support an alternative blockchain which says the ownership, which states the ownership, what I believe to be more accurate. You know, if you want to take a really obvious example, if there's a blockchain back when colonial times in America, would you believe the blockchain of the indigenous people or the blockchain of Christopher Columbus and, you know, all of Pilgrims, you know, everything like that?
All right, so let Paul answer that point.
Well, I'm not sure that there is an answer to that. I believe that people have a tendency to do unfair things, and I believe that Factom cannot stop people from putting a gun to your head and forcing you to sign over, you know, some land or property. In fact, if the land titling system was perfect and honest in every regard, and then you place a government on top of it, they will still seize land. They will write a note that says the governor has just this land is now ours, and we're building a highway. Tough luck. And they can do that on top of a Factom architecture. But I do think that it's fundamentally different when you do something like that and it becomes a public record that the deed was done in that fashion, as opposed to being able to, what they can do today, which is walk in, decide to seize the land, and pretend it was theirs all along. That there was never a person that lived there, there was never anyone that we pushed off, we just had it all along, because there's no record to prove otherwise. And so I do think, in some sense, for all of the flaws that providing an honest land titling system might have, because of the flaws that people bring to the table, you can at the very least create an honest record of those fraudulent behaviors. And in fact, in this particular situation here, one of the big observations they're making is they can't stop, even still, someone going into an Oracle database and changing a land title over to someone else, even if it's backed by Factom. But they believe that the very fact that that has to look like a transaction and that it has to have somebody's signature on it means that they can take someone to court later if it proves that that was a fraudulent transaction. And they'll never be able to deny they did it because it's part of a blockchain record, as opposed to a database where you can make the change and there's no evidence that a transaction occurred.
The other thing is coercion as well. Like if somebody puts a gun to my head and tells me to sign a transaction in the blockchain, I suppose I have some plausible deniability. You could give me some technique like TrueCrypt gives you, hidden volumes and so on. But then we start to get very complex in the way we're expecting lay people to be able to interact with that technology, right?
Yeah, but let's be clear. When they're talking about doing a land title transaction, the signature is a government official who's going to make the statement that he believes this is a valid land transaction. It's not the owner, because this is a government record system, but at that point in time, that guy's name is on the line. So the person that you're going to end up putting a gun to, the person that you're going to take a gun to will not be a landowner. It's going to be the government official who has to sign that record and put his name on that process. And if they have a multi-person system where it's not just the local official but his administrator, then you've got some levels of responsibility, and every one of these officials know that they're putting this in a permanent record that could come back and bite them. And so that's the hope. That's the hope, that you will end up with more honesty, because you can't deny the actions.
Paige, okay, I like this idea. I want to know your thoughts on this notion of the multi-signature party thing, right? So if we imagine a world in the future where, let's pretend there are still governments in our future, as much as you and I might not want that to happen, right, is that we might see a world where actually on the international political stage we're having governments holding other governments accountable by needing to be a one-party signor in the transfer of deeds. And then you have back that distributed model the same way that you do with the blockchain now.
So having multi-sig for multiple governments that are kind of checking each other?
Think about, yeah, I mean, that was the example I gave because it's the easiest to map to. But even if we were going to say, let's say we wanted to set up our own, so you and I self-identified as a new nation or a new group of people, and we wanted to be able to transact and be able to communicate with each other with their own ID systems. Well, we could do that with Factom, right? Because we don't have to tie our legacy identities to our chain IDs. And then what we can do is we can exchange some transactions in such a way that you and I can respect those, without actually sharing that with the government. But then if we want other nation states at a distance to us to respect our transitions, we can just give them a key, and then they can actually also be an arbiter. And I guess what Paul is saying, if I understand him correctly, is the more signatures you get at a distributed level, then the more sure we can be that this event really happened, because you've got then the corrupt official has to persuade all of these people to agree to sign the transaction.
Well, you can persuade people easily with guns, that's for one.
Yeah, but I guess. Like,
yeah,
I'm trying to work out if there's a roadmap here, because, like I say, I'm still very conflicted. I both want this technology in general to succeed, but at the same time, I've still got these, like, sociologically, how are we going to tap into this thing?
So I think actually I think I heard this kind of concept on Brian's show for the first time, but just to sort of reiterate the general concept of what is the purpose of such an identity system if you aren't tying your identity to it, and you can change your if you can make a new identity within this system, what's the point of it in the first place?
You're giving pseudonymity. So the fundamental difference between anonymity and privacy is that I can be in a crowd of anonymous people and not be private, but I'm anonymous. So anonymity is a function of being together with other people that help you become anonymous. On the other hand, privacy is a notion of being alone with the self, a self that only you can know. And the self is prismatic in as much as it can give rise to lots of public identities. So I could, like, say, write a paper anonymously or pseudonymously on the internet and sign it with a PGP key that isn't tethered to any of my others. But that gives me the future possibility at a later date of claiming ownership of the paper, because I can point to a hash in the blockchain, in fact in any blockchain at the moment, and say, look, I signed this with the key at the time. It proves that I have knowledge of an event that I cannot have had it not been the same self that produced that identity than the one before you right now on camera.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks for explaining that portion. I guess with I don't know. I feel like the whole identity on a I'm still very against
I'll tell you where it gets
on a blockchain just because.
Let me just channel you for a second. So
Okay.
where I think you're getting annoyed, it's the same place I get annoyed, because when I did the blockchain ID thing, as soon as I did it, a whole bunch of people came onto the Git repo and said, oh, you should start putting biometric data in there. I was like, whoa, hang on. Like, the UK government's already doing it. When you go into Gatwick Airport in London, you've got all these special cameras are lined up, and apparently the reason they're lined up, they're lined up in rows, and the reason is so they can get every angle of your face, and that's so that it matches the the distance between your eyes, your chin, and the top of your forehead apparently is unique to you, right? And the face is one part of the body that we take the most care of, and so therefore it doesn't change. Like, you can lose a hand or something, in an accident. But the face apparently is something that stays with you for most of your adult life. So the reason why they get all these angles is they then form a hash table of all the different angles, which then goes onto your UK passport. And then when you go through the border control, you actually have to scan it. Now that's dangerous, right? Because you're now tethering something that's very expensive for me to alter later on, unless I will go around wearing a veil. Like, I can't help but be tracked by all these CCTV cameras, and all of a sudden they've got a consolidation.
Yeah, clown nose would work really well, I think. But yeah,
you see what I mean?
I definitely.
Whereas at least
but it's a pain. But it's dangerous. It's a real pain to walk around with a clown nose or whatever, and that's totally ridiculous. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think.
Actually, the clown nose is defeated because it's actually the distance from your nose to your ears, and really you almost have to wear a hijab, something that goes all the way over, and you have something on top of your head to distort the sight. It's really hard to avoid this identification
like
system.
If I could,
go ahead. Go ahead, Brian.
Let me. Oh, Brian.
I want to hear from Brian. He hasn't spoken in a while.
No, sure. I mean, I guess, something I want to ask, Paul, is like why, and I have more that I'd like to add into this, but I'm interested in this answer. Like why, what was the inspiration for Factom? Why did you want to create it in the first place?
You're muted, Paul.
Not pressing the mute button. I apologize. I laugh a lot, so I had to turn off the thing. Anyway, the main inspiration is that I want to build computer systems that are able to track components down to really fine levels, so that basically going to configure a data center with all of the routers and all of the database machines and all of the servers and the web servers and everything else, it should be just as easy as upgrading your system on your Android. And the way that should work is I need to know what the hardware is for each of these systems. I need to know what applications they're going to be involved in, what users are involved. So essentially, if I had all of the triggers and all of the software all laid out, then I would be able to go through and build all of these systems automatically. In other words, a computer is something that you walk up to a screen and type to install stuff in. You think of it as having a hard drive that we just need to print, and configuring a data center should be like going into Adobe Illustrator and printing a bunch of pages. One page is a router. But in order to do that, I have to track a lot of information. I have to know a lot of triggers, and I have to track a lot of data. And this data is all moving targets, so there has versions that change over time. And some of these versions I need, and some of these versions I don't need. And if I use one version of one piece of software, I might need to use another version of another piece of software. So there's this whole database of interactions. So before I can build configuration engines that are able to configure everything from a light switch to a supercomputer, I need to build an identity system that tracks the nature of lots of different things, and before I can build an identity system like that, I need something it allows the management of the identity of software at a level that is very, very easy and yet very accessible for my higher purposes. And
sure.
That's the genesis of Factom.
So that it sounds like you wanted to create a federated layer that all these things could be built upon and done upon. Do I get that right?
Secured with the blockchain, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know that anyone, certainly I don't have like any necessary issue with with that kind of thing being developed, but it becomes what are the and this comes into the marketing of how this is getting pitched. Like it's one thing to want to identify, a certain system. Like if you wanted, like you mentioned, the light switch, to be able to turn on the light switch or something, you need to recognize, that's a light switch that you're communicating with. I think the issue becomes, for me in any case, it becomes, what does this get used for? Something that's being very popularly discussed with BitNation is like using it to put marriage certificates on, and that you could create like a contract that only went for 5, 10, or 15 years, something like that. Now, there's an issue, and this is a well-known issue in Silicon Valley, which is, after you're done making the building will make you. And so my concern is that when you are putting in, a title deed, even identity, personal identity systems and things like that, is that the human condition ends up molding itself into what these blockchains like Factom and maybe others, are how they operate, how they work. I mean, just like with the marriage example is a good one, because then what's going to happen is people will just wait. If they find out they hate their marriage, they'll wait another 10 years if they're on a 15-year plan to be completely, sad and, just angry instead of just walking away. Where if there was no contract, if there was no registry, if there was no ledger, they could just walk away from it and be happy. But instead, they're going to be conditioned to stick with it. And so go ahead.
I don't think that's fair. I think that what you have is a marriage contract Factom chain, and you've got a commitment for 5 years, and then after 3 years, you put an entry in there that says, I'm out of here and I'm walking, and I take whatever punishment the contract requires of me, and I step away.
Right, absolutely. But if there was no contract, there'd be no punishment. So that's my point. Is that
so don't go into the contract.
Right.
What's
so it's
that?
a voluntary system. I think what Paul is saying is a voluntary system that you don't have to get involved. But
it's voluntary, but the point is we have with Bitcoin, with blockchain technology, we have a golden opportunity to just do a quantum leap in how we do business with each other and how we interact with each other as human beings. Okay, and I really appreciate all these technologies. I appreciate what you're doing, Paul. And to just mold these, to base these things upon, systems that we should well know now suck. Are very, they don't, they're not freedom oriented. They're not, they're more towards like keeping us under control for whatever reasons, or not having personal control of our lives. Like, let's concentrate on, getting rid of the bloat. Let's concentrate on getting rid of the systems that we know now just aren't good. I mean, I'd even argue that like ID systems, like personal ID systems, like as in Brian Sovryn, I would argue that there is no good case for those to even exist. An example.
But see, now I would actually agree with that, but I think that for instance, where do I see ID systems that work really, really well? Well, on Reddit, I'm known as Alan X. Now, Alan's my middle name, so I'm not really denying who I am. But on the other hand, until I told you my middle name was Alan, I doubt anybody knew, right? And the interesting thing is I get accused of looking a bit like Bill Gates, but my name is really Paul Allen, and I just find that humorous.
Yeah.
So,
you could use the Factom to make IDs if you wanted, regardless. It's just it's just about framing the discussion and moving it in that direction or not.
Well, that's my point. Is it's not so much the technologies; it's like what do people want to do with this stuff, and I think that's where people really need to pay attention. Because you look at something, Google's a great search engine, but then look at what Google's done as far as like invading our privacy and anonymity and things like that. These are
both good and bad, because Google probably invades our privacy, but they've also done more to publicize what the government's demanding of them than most of the other companies.
Cost-benefit analysis, no doubt. You're right. I mean, you got, but it becomes the question, and it's good if we can figure this stuff out beforehand. Right. Are the negatives? Do the negatives outweigh the positives? Because something just having some positives, I don't think is good enough reason for it to exist. Certainly.
I will say this: we frame this as honesty is subversive, and I want to say that if I build a system that allows people to honestly document over time, and I'll build a system that if you dishonestly document over time, you've proven that you're dishonest and you'll go to jail, I believe that fundamentally is a good thing. Now, whether it can be abused or not, it certainly can be abused. If you build guns, they allowed hunting to work out really well, and then people also use them to shoot each other. And you make rugs; those are really great until somebody rolls you up in one you can't get out. And I can't think of Q-tips. Q-tips are really great until somebody sticks one in your eye. Okay.
Right.
I can't help that, but I have this fundamental suspicion that if we can convince governments and businesses to use immutable audits to document their business processes, more people will go to jail. And that's a good thing.
Well, the corrupt people, you mean?
Absolutely. Because one of the things about an immutable record, it's really, really, really hard to run away from when you've committed fraud against $100 trillion. But somehow or other, LIBOR involved $800 trillion and zero people go to jail because nobody documented the business processes. Everybody could run away and say, well, we really don't know who did it.
You mean it makes it easier, makes it more accountable. You know, whether they go to jail. I mean, I don't think more people in jail is really good, but you know,
well,
I think what you mean is that they're accountable for their actions more because of this ledger. Whether they go to jail or not is almost a different discussion. But I definitely,
honestly, yeah. I think criminals should go to jail. I don't necessarily.
We can have another episode about jail, I guess.
Yeah. Well, no, I have a different definition of criminal than the criminal justice system has. I think we put people in jail for being poor a lot more than we put people in jail for being criminals. And
yeah, I agree with you there.
And so if we reform the system so that white-collar crime is a harder crime to get away with, instead of the easiest crime ever known to mankind, then I think we will have done a good thing.
Well, I think this is a good note on which we should start to wrap up. And if guys have got any final thoughts, mine would just be that, and I've said this before, that I think that one of the reasons why the Bitcoin blockchain is such a mind virus and pervades so many enthusiasms across the world is because of its neutrality. That actually it shows up for us all of our failings as human beings because it gives us a way to scale trust again. It gives us a way to prove whether or not someone has either acted honestly or dishonestly. You know, what we do with that tool, I think, is entirely up to us. There's a lot of these problems are sociological ones. I just want to draw quickly on something that Brian said. He quoted, actually that quote, Brian, was from Marshall McLuhan. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time. We shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. And I think if we don't think about, the reason I wanted to get you and Paige on here with Paul is because I think this debate is not being had. And whilst I love the blockchain technology, and I'm, as a techie, like with Paul, like, yeah, I want to see this thing exist, but I also understand that this tool could be misappropriated if it isn't introduced right, and maybe that's the responsibility of us, like in this age, in this time. Maybe the financial crisis isn't an accident. Maybe we're supposed to witness it and learn something from it, because it's a fundamental feature of societies that we do keep records of things. We have language. What turns the dwelling into a town is the ability for the people to understand one another and use language to appropriate different tools for shared ends. And when we were living in the noble savage going through the forests, of course, you could always run away and you were never traceable. In fact, even the word anthropos from Greece actually means the one with a face. And so it was really only when we started to combine our memory with the matter of the universe that we started getting the notion of writing things down and tabulating things. And now it feels like we're approaching the singularity, and techies like Paul and me, we love to timestamp everything. But at the same time, we've also got to think about what this could possibly lead to, not just in the average case, but also in the edge cases. Like, what's the most evil thing you could do with this, and is it worth it? Is that risk worth it for the most positive things that it could end up creating? So, any final thoughts from any of our guests today?
I guess I want to make an analogy to the whole gun as a tool thing. So I guess guns are they're originally, I don't even know if they're originally used for shooting animals or shooting humans, for hunting or for just killing other people. But in the end, it was giving that tool and having that tool centralized into central powers that created machine guns and horrific things that are obviously made to kill people and not made to simply go hunting or whatever. So with the idea of the tools shaping us and us shaping the tools, I do think that these tools can get into the hands of the wrong people, into the wrong power structures, and made into something that's it wasn't originally intended for. And yes, it does bring the question of would is the gun necessary at all in this case? Could we find more creative ways to go hunting and whatever? I think it does bring in these questions, and we should be thinking about more creative solutions rather than just taking the easiest way, the most obvious way, I suppose.
Very good. Brian, you have any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I definitely want to say, I appreciate Paul. I mean, you didn't shy away from anything. Bravo. So thank you for that. I appreciate that, because a lot of CEOs for some of these businesses, they'll just like turn and walk away. So I do appreciate that. I guess I want to put out there that there are, and I'm not saying Factom is one of these. Maybe history will be the only thing that shows with a lot of these blockchain technologies. But there's technologies that set humans free, and then there's technologies that enslave them. And it's important to look at those, and it is, I think it is either or. You can say technology isn't inherently evil or what, but if the tools do shape you, then that is how it goes. So something to just be wary, keep a lookout, and have these conversations. Technology should be right up there with politics and religion as far as being discussed and treated very seriously, because it's shaping us in a very real way.
Very good. Yeah, Paul, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I believe that basically Factom is a mechanism for providing honesty, for providing immutable ledgers. I really don't see it as a gun at all. I see it as a history. For the first time, perhaps, we may be able to create histories that are written in the period as opposed to histories that are written by the winners. And heroes are all people that are able to do something that nobody else has done before. And, I have my T-shirt. I am a Marvel fan. I love superheroes. If we can give every person on the face of the planet to write their history in a way that nobody can deny it, I think the weight of this is going to be on the good side, and so that's kind of where I want to be. And Brian, I don't really shy away from anything. I say everything that I really shouldn't say, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just the way. My biggest skill that I've been working on all my life is trying to learn how to shut up, and I haven't succeeded yet. So,
okay, Paul,
that's where we are.
Well, I really appreciate not enough people in this industry say I don't know, and it sounds to me like the design intent is a good one, that you're intending this to empower the weak. But I think it's also important that we get you back again so we can start talking about William Gibson's affordances in tool building. That when you build a tool, that it has certain affordances. But I'm not going to go into that because we'll be here for another hour. But yeah, I'm really grateful to everyone that stayed, tuned for like an hour and a quarter. It's only, of course, one more obligatory question for Theo. What do you make of all of this? You've been the quietest one on the panel. I kind of wanted you here because I knew you would
everyone had a lot. It's okay. Everyone had a whole lot to say, and thanks everyone for coming on. And actually, I thought we were going to have time to talk about MadeSafe too, but I guess we'll have to do that again.
Well, we should definitely do that next time. Because there is, this could easily
go
I thought
it was going to be like kind of two. We can do it another.
Well, we could talk about the mesh networks. How about that? How about Paul? Would you like to come on again?
It's just because MadeSafe doesn't have a blockchain, and I don't think people, everyone's talking about everything with blockchains for the most part.
Paige, would you be up for coming on next week and giving us the MadeSafe perspective?
Sounds good. I can do that.
Cool. Well, let's pencil in this time next week. I've got to go because, I don't know, I think they closed the building down at some point in time. But yeah, thanks again for everyone for staying tuned for such a long time. We love having you as an audience. You really do go through the videos, and I know you send us emails and you tell us like, oh, that video where you said this thing at 45 minutes in. We really appreciate when you say that. So please have your say in the comments below. We will pick this up again, especially if there are any particular points that were pulled up that you want to see discussed more. Thank you to all my guests. We got Paige, Brian, Paul, and Theo, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.